What is good, everybody? How's everybody doing today? I hope that everybody is doing absolutely fantastic, and I think I might have. Okay, cool, cool. All right. Sorry about that. Sorry about that, everybody. I put in the intro and it didn't necessarily show, so I do apologize for that. But anyways, uh let's get this show on the road. I am extremely happy to see you all here. um so what we're going to actually go into today is we're going to actually talk about a plethora, well, not a plethora, that's actually not true. We're going to talk about a couple of things based on the actual conflict within Ukraine at this very moment. How did we get to that point? What was the situation that brought us to this very point in time? And what did, how did we how do we not know that Russia was going to do this? Or or actually, different question, why did Russia feel that it was okay to invade Ukraine without any ramifications whatsoever? Um, so we'll just start right off the bat right now. As we can see, with this very overlay. This is happening within 2014. February 2014, Russia has decided to move into Donetsk and Luhansk. These two areas right over here, as you can see. So Donetsk and Luhansk are right on the western side of Russia, right on the lower western side of Russia. The area decided to separate from the Ukraine. The problem is, as everybody started to figure out, was that they didn't separate on their own accord. They were actually, I wouldn't say forced to separate, but their separation happened because Russian private military decided to go into those general areas and to ramp up support for the Russians, right? So when we're looking at this, when we're looking at how Russia was able to do what they did, we have to understand the dynamic and the geography of the area at that particular time. So when you look, and I'll bring up the overlay again, if you look at this overlay, as you can see there's a river, the Donbass River, which is which literally splits the Ukraine in two. Now, if you look at that general area at that time, and definitely before 2014, there were certain individuals that had more leanings towards Russia than they did to Western Ukraine. So there were individuals that looked at Russia as being this paternal type of, let's just say, like a cousin. They looked at Russians as a cousin in a sense. And to tell you the truth, Eastern Ukraine, it does have a large minority of Russians living within its general area. However, what we started to see was that the Russians wanted to speed up the process because it was taking way too long for Russia to actually try to persuade the Ukrainians into separating. So what they did was that they sent in the private military in order to help this process go along, right? However, which is beautiful, not beautiful, but however, Russia decided to go into the Crimea as well to hit two birds with one stone. So they decided to go into the Donbass and Luhansk area and move their private military into the Crimea in order to annex the Crimea while stating that Donetsk and Luhansk was willfully wanting to separate from the Ukraine, right? And we realized this through 2014, 2015. The conflict actually continued from 2014 or February 2014 all the way until literally 2022. And we see this constantly kind of happening. The clashes die down. There seems to be a ceasefire within the Donetsk-Luhansk area. And then all of a sudden, ceasefires shut down either by the Russian separatists wanting to engage the conflict again, and sometimes even the Ukrainians engaging in order to take back the territory that they believe belonged to them. And obviously it does belong to them. However, this is the thing that really starts getting your mind sort of bended in a sense, is that when we step up to February 24th, 2022, what ends up happening? And the one thing that ends up happening is Russia is building up its military force because, and we got to go back, why did Russia actually feel that it was okay to invade the Ukraine? Why was that? And the first thing is, it was because after the Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimean takeover, the West only utilized sanctions, which really didn't hurt the Russians in any particular way. Yes, in certain areas it hurt, obviously the economy, but in the end, it really didn't do that much damage to begin with, right? So if we are love you too, Annoyed, love you as well. And Linear, yes. How are you doing? And I did see what you wrote in chat. So I will jump into that right now, actually. Your stream, confusion. I was confused too, Linear. I was also confused. But luckily, everything seemed to work out in the end. So I enjoyed that we were able to do this, that it didn't really mess up a lot of things. However, right, this is the what? I was talking to Annoyed, and yeah. So when we look at the circumstance and when we look at what was happening within the Crimea at that particular time, or not the Crimea, my apologies. When we look at what was happening with the Donbass and Luhansk and Crimean conflict, or what ended the beginning, the first half of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, what we actually started to see is that the West really didn't act in any particular way, which was quote unquote Russia didn't feel the ramifications of what they did, right? So from that point forward, which was the West's fault for not putting enough emphasis on that you do not take other people's land, right? Russia decided that, well, it was going to help Assad in 2015, 16, and 2015 and 16 in order to get the areas that were once underneath Bashar al-Assad's regime and to put it back into his regime once the Arab Spring started to die down, because sadly, what happened with the Arab Spring was that there were extremist elements as well that were also infiltrating within the Arab Spring as well, and let alone a lot of other things that were happening that we won't get into in this episode, but we do realize, and I will jump into more of it in the next episode, is that what we do see in particular is the Russians becoming more bold. The Russians have become more bold within their endeavor when they started to see that even when they were taking the territory back for Bashar al-Assad, that even the West again wasn't doing enough in order to show Russia that, okay, shit, sorry, okay, we shouldn't be doing this or anything like that. So all of a sudden, back in now in 2022 or February 24th, 2022, we see an emboldened Russia, and an emboldened Russia wants to create a buffer zone to what is called NATO. And there's a lot of territories, definitely, if you look at Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all those territories have joined into NATO. And if I pull up the overlay, you will see exactly what I mean right over here. So, oh, sorry. Well, actually, I don't necessarily have that overlay. My apologies. However, if you go further, if you look at a map and you look above Ukraine, you will see these three. Like after Belarus, you will see three small nations: Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And those three small nations joined NATO. So Russia feels that it's being surrounded by enemies on all sides, and definitely NATO and Russia aren't on good terms. So what ends up happening is that Russia feels the need that it needs to create a buffer zone because it already has Belarus on its side, right? Belarus already is allied with Russia. So they felt more emboldened to go into Ukraine, because if you look where Kiev is, and I will definitely show you where Kiev is compared to Belarus, that is true. I don't have that overlay either because there's copyrights, and I didn't want to get copyrighted by any of the images that I put forward. So we're going to skip on that. And I did want to try to give you, the viewer, a more elaborate look at the circumstances, obviously, but sadly, I didn't have that much time. However, Kiev is literally very close to the Belarusian border. So Russia felt that, okay, now I can send forces into Belarus and then take over Kiev while engaging in the eastern side of Ukraine in order to literally bring Ukraine to its knees. However, Russia forgot one thing: the emboldenedness of the Ukrainian people and the spirit that the Ukrainian people brought forward, because their land was being taken and invaded. And literally nobody realized that that was going to happen. And it shocked the entire world to see this superpower, this Russia, this juggernaut, being beaten back after some time by the Ukrainians because of the Ukrainians' fighting will. They were not going to let Russia take what wasn't theirs. And that was something that I see as a huge benefit for Ukraine, because now you have a people that are going to fight for their nation and not just flee in the face of Russia. So now Russia had to pull back after 2 months of fighting in on the borders of Kiev. They had to pull back into Belarus and back into the areas which they conquered. And now this is where I'm going to bring up the second overlay. So if you look right over here, the red line that you see that is right next to, in the midst of the writing as well, that says Russian-Ukraine war after invasion of Ukraine, February 24th, 2022, that was the new territory that Russia, that is underneath Russian control at this very moment. Now, the huge thing that ended up happening now was that Russia had to pull back into or behind this red line that you see, not the box, but just the red line in general of how the borders are at this very moment, and where Russia has accumulated land, and more to the point, where Russia is the strongest in that general area. But there's a problem because now the Russian military has to rethink its military strategy. It needs to think what is going to be the next step. What is going to be the next step of their invasion of Ukraine? Or are they going to come to the table? Putin can't necessarily come to the table right now because he wants to have he wants more territory underneath his jurisdiction or underneath Russia in order to create that buffer. But he can't move forward because he's constantly engaged with a stronger force of Ukrainian nationals that want to protect their land. So now this is where we start really looking at battle strategies into how Ukraine and how Russia can kind of bring either Ukraine to the table or how Ukraine can bring Russia to the table. And in my opinion, in my personal opinion, Russia or Ukraine needs to take Odessa. Now, where is Odessa located? Very good question. So Odessa, if we look at the overlays, is located right at, see where that little purple circle is? Right there, that is where you see Odessa. And what I call Odessa is the strategic city. Now, why do I call Odessa a strategic city? Well, if you look above the actual purple dot, what do you see? You see that there's an area that is called, or right above, there's a gray area. That area is called Moldova, and right beside the other gray area is what you call Romania. Now, at this very moment, Moldova and Romania are kind of neutral within this conflict. They're not like Belarus, who's already decided to join Russia. What they're wanting to see is who's going to be the victor of this particular battle, and let alone who's going to take possession of Odessa. Because this is the huge thing that we're actually starting to see right now, is that Russia, because they're reorganizing their military prowess, what we are looking at is that we're seeing that Ukraine is taking what is called the northeastern, or trying to take the northeastern side of Ukraine at the moment, which is underneath Russian control. Where I find there's an issue with doing that is, and I'll bring back up the map also, if you look above on the eastern side of the map, you will see a darker gray area. That darker gray area is Belarus. Belarus in itself is a Russian ally. So right now, the way that I'm looking, and let alone the red, is Russia. So the red area is Russia, the dark gray area is Belarus. What does this mean? This means that the Ukrainian military and people are engaging in a conflict which is right on the border with their enemies. Meaning that if you're going to continue engaging on these sides, all you're going to do is just keep pushing, right, against a strong enemy force. Now, what is going to happen if you keep pushing against a strong military force? And if you start, let's just say, making incursions into Russia or Belarus, what ends up happening is something that you will actually see is Russia is going to mobilize in order to beat back that threat, because they feel that their land is being invaded, and henceforth they're going to use that in order to push or utilize military prowess to push. And most of the time, sadly, Russia isn't necessarily that good in attacking and invading a particular area. However, well, I don't mean sadly, because if you really look at it, Russia is the one that is invading Ukraine. So For the Russians, it's sadly because there's a lot of people who are dying unnecessarily on the Russian side. And on the Ukrainian side, is beneficial because now they're starting to show their will and their iron against a stronger military force. However, Russia is much better when they're pulling back from a territory, reorganizing, and then using what is called a quote unquote cauldron tactic. And what that is that their forces will slowly start to circumvent enemy until they are fully surrounded. And then they start coming in until they devour the enemy in the center of their cauldron. So that is what the Ukrainians need to be extremely careful about. And that's why, for me, I'm looking at where they're going right now in the northeast and in the northern area in order to attack near the Belarusian border and near the Russian and Russian held area in Ukraine, is that the Russians can, and definitely if Belarus feels that it's being its sovereignty is going to be jeopardized, it will also send military personnel or more military personnel in order to engage the Ukrainians, and that's where you're going to see the cauldron tactic happening. However, and this is the one thing that the Ukrainians can do for a great benefit, is that they will need to lose a certain amount of ground, but they will need to pull back in order to protect Kiev, because Kiev is the capital city. So if Kiev falls, morale falls. If morale falls, the fighting will of the people is not going to, well, it's not that it's not going to be there, but it's going to be greatly lowered. It's going to be they're going to be greatly demoralized because their capital city has been taken. However, if the Ukrainians pull back, they can build up their defenses in a particular way that Russia will not be able to engage, because they've tried it before in Kiev and they failed. They had to pull back. So that is the one thing that the Ukrainians have, is that if they utilize their will and they utilize their defenses properly, they will be able to hold the line against the Russian forces as they keep trying to gain more land, because they'll feel that the Ukrainians are pulling back because they can't push anymore. No, that is not true. They're pulling back in order to reformulate, to strengthen their borders, and to strengthen their cities' borders, and to prepare for another frontal attack that Russia is probably going to be sending at them. However, now I'm going to bring up another image. However, if you look where Odessa is, Kiev is right on the top and right near Belarus. However, if the Ukrainians are able to send a large enough force to Odessa and hold Odessa right on the Moldovan border and right on the Romanian border, what will you see is that the Romanians will feel emboldened, because if Russia keeps trying to take Odessa, but they are unable to take Odessa, and the Ukrainians have actually fortified and sent more reinforcements to Odessa, what ends up happening is that the Moldovans, who do have 1,700 Russian soldiers within their border at this very moment, will feel emboldened to beat back the Russian soldiers, to hopefully, this is what I'm thinking, hopefully to send their own forces to help out the Ukrainians, because now the Ukrainians have shown that the Russians aren't going to break through their border. And also the Romanians are going to feel the same exact way too, and send in their forces to help out the Ukrainians. Because Odessa is a strategic city for both Russia and Ukraine. If Russia decides that it's going to go full strength, and that's the thing that Ukraine needs to be careful of, because it's also getting its weapons, and let alone drones and everything like that it needs within the city of Odessa from Turkey. Now, Turkey is sending these weapons in order for Ukraine to use to protect themselves. However, if the Ukrainians lose Odessa, that means that they have a line of supplies, or a supply line, as it's called, that would be cut from them. And that is going to be a huge detriment to Ukraine, because if Russia takes Odessa, it's then going to be able to, and I will show you again through the overlay, wrong button, through the overlay. If any of Russia or Ukraine takes Odessa, you see Moldova and Romania are going to be right underneath whoever forces are within that jurisdiction. If it's Russia, Moldova is going to bend to Russia's will, and Romania is going to bend to Russia's will as well. And their neutrality will flip. And instead of actually helping the Ukrainians out, if the Ukrainians have that general area, they'll start helping out the Russians. And with that being stated, let me pull up another map. With that being stated, see where that red line is right now, or at the south end of the map? If that goes anywhere near Odessa and they're able to take control of Odessa, that means that Moldova and Romania will bend to Russia's demands. And let alone if Russia can then use Romania, because you can see how big Romanian territory is and Moldovan territory is, if they're able to use those territories in order to strike at the Ukraine will not be, sadly, I think, the Ukraine will not be able to withstand that multiple attacks from different areas. And that's where you're going to start to slowly see the loss of possession of more Ukrainian territory. So the Ukrainians need to think about their next tactic and look at Odessa being that major city that it's not like in my opinion at least, it's not a you do it if you want. For me, I think it is 100% I don't want to say mandatory, but 100% the benefit of the Ukrainians to take Odessa and to build up Odessan fortifications and stuff. Because if they are able to do that, I'll open up the map again. Look how close Odessa is to the Crimea. The Crimea in itself, and I'll show you another overlay. See, right there's the Crimea, right at this red square at the bottom of the southern end is what we call the Crimea. And Russia did annex that in February 2014. Now, if the Ukrainians are able to take Odessa and move with a large enough force while also dragging Russian soldiers into attacking their western, or I should say northwestern front, that means that there's not going to be enough soldiers to actually protect the southern front. And if the Ukrainians can push through the Russians' southeastern front, they can literally be near the Crimea. And if they go near the Crimea, they can engage in attacks on the Crimea, and maybe even, if Russia doesn't come to the table, maybe even take the Crimea from Russia. And that's the whole entire point, right? What we're looking at is how to bring Russia to the table. And the reality I think it's just Crimea, not the Crimea. No, you're definitely right. It's not the Crimea, but just for me, I don't know why, but I'm just saying it because right now Crimea is kind of, or not kind of, it is in limbo right now. So for any person that is within this conflict right now, definitely the Ukrainians and the Russians, the Crimea is definitely, at least for the Russians, a major stronghold. Because if you look, and I'll show you again based on the Crimea a little bit right over here, Russia actually has on its southern front, as you can see right where the Crimea is, you can see that Russia doesn't really have any connection, rather to the main, or not to the mainland, but I mean on the northern front until it takes Crimea. And that in itself is something that the Ukrainians should be thinking about, is how do we get closer to the Crimea in order to push back Russian forces into Russian territory, and then they can bolster Crimea and hopefully be able to hold it back from any type of Russian invasion in the future. So that's the way how I kind of see it at the moment, is what is the benefit at this very moment for the Ukraine, and what can be the detriment of the Ukraine if Russia is able to take the Crimea, and what would be to the benefit of, or not benefit, but the benefit of Ukraine actually, if it's able to take Odessa and hold Odessa and be able to move their forces, a strong force from Odessa into the southeastern flank of the Russian territory, or the Russian territory that they have now based on their invasion in from February 24th, 2022. And so I think that is something that the Ukrainians definitely need to think about, and how they, I think, need to start bolstering up the Crimea so that there's no issue in the future where it's actually going to be pushing back against them, and ending up with Russia taking larger and larger chunks of territory. Because again, let me just show you the map, right? If you look right there where the Moldova and where Romania are, if you look at the Romanian territory, right on the Ukrainian border, and if you look at the Moldovan territory right on the Ukrainian border, you will then see that if Russia is able to march through Romania without having any type of ramifications or any type of hostility from the Romanians or the Moldovans, now they literally have a full circumference of where they can literally invade Ukraine, and more strategically invade Ukraine to the detriment of the Ukrainians. So that's why I'm stating that Moldova is the most strategic city within this conflict. And if they are able, anybody, if the Russians or the Ukrainians are able to hold Moldova and are able to take Moldova, if the Russians are able to take Moldova, and if the Ukrainians are able to hold Moldova, that would be to, that would literally, in my opinion, end the war. But the Ukrainians need and must defend Moldova in order for it to be of any significance to them, and that they are able to have that defense that they definitely need that's on their territory and everything. So that's the way how I see the Russian Ukrainian conflict coming to a swift conclusion, is through that, is through Odessa. Odessa is the key, in my opinion. Odessa is the key for both nations in order to bring one or the other to the table, to the negotiating table. So let me look at the. That's actually a very good question, Linear. At this very moment, it does belong to the Ukraine. However, or to Ukraine. However, the problem is that Odessa isn't very much protected. And at this very moment, Russia is underneath its kind of military reorganization because of its initial failure of taking Kiev and its initial failure of taking the northern territories of Ukraine during their initial invasion and using Belarus as that jumping board into Ukraine. The reality is that they ended up screwing over themselves. They attacked the Ukraine on too many fronts instead of organizing their front in a particular way that had the mass of their forces coming from the east. If that is what they did, I think that we would be seeing a completely different story of the Ukrainian Russian conflict. But because they wanted to eat too much of Ukraine too fast, they ended up Russia ended up screwing themselves over. However, who owns Odessa right now is Ukraine. But like the position is very I would say it's more in limbo at this very moment. And when we look and we're seeing the Russian reorganization happening, I have a feeling that if Russia realizes the true strategic implication or benefit of taking Odessa, they will reorganize in a particular way where the majority of their force will be within the Crimea and will be on that southeastern side of the territory that they did take, or the territory that's now underneath their control. And then they will be able to push outward and take much more territory. And at that point, which is extremely sad, but Odessa might not have enough reinforcements in order to protect itself from a Russian advancement such as that. Now, one thing that I will also state is that Russia tried to use propaganda in order to lessen the blow of their invasion in Ukraine. So what they stated was that, well, the Ukrainians have a tendency of being what they would call quote unquote individuals that were they had a tendency of leaning to the far right politically. But that is not true at all. Because if you look at the majority of Ukrainians, the majority of Ukrainians did not have this type of leaning whatsoever. And let alone, even if the majority of, and I'm just saying, even if the majority of Ukrainians were on, let's just say, quote unquote, the far right, that still does not give a nation the right to invade an independent and sovereign nation. Because now you are still the hostile compared to, let's just say, that nation, which is Ukraine, engaging in hostile acts against Russia or Russians or whatever. And if Russia really wanted to, what's the word I'm looking for? If Russia really wanted to lessen the blow of their invasion, they would have thought of using the Russian nationals that were on the Ukrainian side and state that the Ukrainians have been harassing or even towards the extent of beating or killing, let's just say, Russian nationals that are on the Ukrainian or in Ukrainian territory, right? And then that would it wouldn't justify the invasion, but if there was any truth to the statement, people would be more or less be like, okay, there's there's more to the story than meets the eye. However, the real problem is that Russia was lying about the situation the entire time, and there was no truth to their statement. And henceforth, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, thinking that the world would just take it in stride, just like they did when Russia took over Crimea and like literally took over Donetsk and Luhansk. So, all in all, what we do see is a different perspective within the Ukrainian conflict, and now the real trial begins for the Ukrainians. Because if, as I keep saying, if Odessa falls and Ukraine isn't able to have a strong hold on it, Russia has so much more maneuvering capability, and that in itself will lead to um, the Ukraine literally crumbling under the weight of Russian attacks from almost every angle except from the West. And that's just not feasible. That's just not feasible for Ukraine whatsoever. So they need to have Odessa. They need to protect that general area and bolster up its strength so that it doesn't fall into Russian hands. So yeah. So if anybody has any questions, I don't know how many individuals are within the chat right now. Beforehand, I saw 5, but then after I saw that with my well, I don't think it was internet issues. It was just like starting up the show. It ended up, I guess people were like, "Oh no, I don't want to stay within this, I guess, stream or see this stream," which is perfectly fine. It's up to the people to decide what they wish to watch. But if there is anybody who's on here at this very moment and have any questions about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I am definitely here in order to answer, or to my best capabilities, any questions that you may have. If not, then it's fine, and I'll just continue with my statements. Also, I just wanted to give a shout out for if Annoyed is still here. Annoyed, shout out to you. Linear, shout out to you. Thank you so much for coming on through. If there's anybody else who's in here, which I can't see at the moment, thank you for coming on through. I really do appreciate it. I know I'm a newcomer to the community, but if you're still there and you're still listening even after the blunder that I had, I really do appreciate it. And you're all just fantastic individuals. So, what we actually are looking at, whenever we look at a conflict, because there's a couple of people that state, well, there shouldn't be conflicts, or we should be more pacifistic when we're looking at the different areas and everything like that. But the reason why I'm bringing up, and I think that talking about world conflicts is extremely beneficial when we're talking about even like the atheist community in general, is because I think that there are certain times where conflicts need to be had, like for instance with Russia invading Ukraine. And imagine how that would have went if Russia was able to take all of Ukraine or whatever. The amount, how many people would be looking, because Russia won't just stop at that. If they take the Ukraine, you know for sure the next on the block would be literally Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And then from there, you know that what they were going to aim at next is going to be Finland and Sweden, because they're the ones that are constantly bullying Finland and Sweden into not joining NATO. But because they really messed up when they invaded, Finland and Sweden have now doubled their efforts to join NATO because they realized that Russia isn't as powerful as they actually thought. And now that was the thing that Russia also forgot to do, was that when you invade a particular space, when you invade a particular area, what you want to do is, quote unquote, invade with confidence, so that when your enemy is looking, they're like, ooh, okay, we don't want to mess with this individual, because they're able to literally take territory extremely quick and with either with extreme hostility or with extreme swiftness. And if that does happen, then everywhere else in the world will slowly but surely be more silent. And then Russia would be able to do whatever it kind of wants within its general area or within its general region. But Russia decided to take too much, too quick, and ended up showing everybody around the world that the Russian military isn't as powerful as we thought it was. And because of that, we're actually seeing that there are certain nations now that are talking about Russia not being that superpower, and even towards a certain extent, not even being a regional power, since they're not even able to take the Crimea in a sense. So now Russia led itself into a huge conundrum and a huge issue that now they need to try to find their way out of, which, as I stated, they can if they go after Odessa. If they go after Odessa, the whole entire scenario they got themselves caught up with will then cease to be a problem and be more or less a positive reinforcement for Russia. And as I stated, the Ukraine sadly will not be able to engage Russia in all the different areas that it's able to hit the Ukraine. But that is my take on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and that's how I think the Russian-Ukrainian conflict can come to an end, and hopefully to the benefit of the Ukrainians, so that the Ukrainians can have that, can have either most of their territory back, all their territory back, or a certain percentage of their territory that Russia hasn't as of yet taken. So that is my wrap up. So if anything, if, as I stated, if anybody has any more questions or whatever, Linear asked a really great question based on who governs Odessa. And if anybody else has any good questions or anything like that, please ask. And if not, well, it's perfectly fine. And I will end the stream. So, but I'm not going to end the stream right now. I'm just going to wait until anybody has any questions and they wish to answer them. Ask them. Answer them. Ask them, I mean. Okay. Well, it seems like nobody has questions. That literally, this was a really good stream. At least for me, I'm happy with the way that it went. Even though with the beginning being a mess up, and I do apologize for that. Again, I'm a beginner streamer, so I am trying my best in order to get it right. And the more I do this, the more that I think I will have the right formula in order to show you, or to show you, the viewer, that I am making progress within my videos and streaming and everything like that. And I hope you really like the show. As I stated again, you guys are amazing. And I hope you have a great night, have a great evening, sleep well, and remember, the Atheist Enlightenment is here to stay. Now, that is a horrible opening, so I will not utilize that. But whatever. It's fine. It's fine. We'll figure out some. We'll figure out some. Anyways, so love you all. Much appreciated. You're all great. And I can't wait to see you all for tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to be talking about the atheist community. Yeah. So that's going to be great. So hope you guys are there to see it. And again, much love, much respect, and thank you all for coming by. Have a great night.